I'm so glad you decided to watch this video. I'm Patti Kasper, your trauma-informed FASD coach, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you how challenging it can be to raise children, especially if they seem to be a little different or maybe a lot. You've been on the front lines. Whether the child you love is yours biologically or through kin care, foster care, or adoption, if you're watching this, you've likely tried everything you know to do, everything your parents, your friends, your neighbors have suggested, as well as doctors, therapists, teachers, and any other professional to whom you've turned for help. As a parent, the question then becomes, what am I missing? Our country's addiction to alcohol may seem utterly unrelated to your situation, but it may well not be. 1 in 7 pregnancies are exposed to alcohol, and 1 in 20 people are impacted by that exposure to the degree that they process life. They experience the world differently than most people. So understanding FASD or fetal alcohol spectrum disorders can change everything for the families who are affected. And most families are aware of the role of alcohol exposure, the role it plays in their family struggles. The diagnostic rate is only 0.01%, even though more people are affected by prenatal exposure to alcohol than autism, ADHD, cerebral palsy, and Down syndrome combined. I first began studying FASD because as a foster and adoption social worker, I was tired of watching kids fall through the cracks and watching parents give up, being that source of hope and healing for kids who were desperately hurting, who were not adequately prepared for helping children who have been exposed to prenatally exposed to alcohol. I've worked with so many hundreds of parents, hundreds of families, and so many of the parents I work with have complained that therapy made their kids' behaviors so much worse, or they've been accused of undermining the therapeutic process, or even worse yet, they've been accused of making it all up because, we just don't see little Johnny that way. If this sounds like your experience, then keep watching. If we look at alcohol's chemical makeup, what we see is that it's a solvent. Well, as such, it dissolves fatty tissues or lipids, and that happens to be what all the protective barriers in our body are made out of. So, like a chemical IED, our brains take the biggest hit because our brains are developing at every point along the pregnancy, whereas other systems in our body have a much narrower window of vulnerability. Anything alcohol touches while it is developing is impacted because alcohol goes right through those protective barriers. So alcohol, it acts, as I said, like a chemical IED. The brain is also particularly vulnerable because 1/3 of a nerve cell is wrapped in a fatty tissue, a protective tissue called a myelin sheath. That makes our brains particularly vulnerable. Our brain is command central for all of the ways that our body works. So very, very important, and the effects are very far-reaching. But if you've been told your child's issues were not alcohol related because they don't have the face, realize that only 10% of kids on the spectrum have those facial features. The rest do not. All those facial features do not mean that your child has the worst form of FASD as opposed to highly functioning FASD. It's not that at all. All those facial features indicate is that alcohol was exposed to your child on days 17 through 21 of pregnancy because it's during those 5 days that the tissues were formed that later evolve into the facial features. That's all that means. So FASD is indeed a spectrum disorder, but it's not a linear spectrum with the most severe form of FASD on one end and highly functioning on the other. I know that's how we're used to thinking about spectrums, but it's not the case. Instead, it is a multifaceted, multidimensional spectrum, such as what you see here, because there are so many factors that go into how each one is impacted differently by alcohol exposure, including the timing of alcohol. Remember, I said that alcohol will damage whatever it touches at the time of development, whenever that alcohol exposure happens. So whether it's an organ that is forming or the organ's function that is being programmed, it takes a hit. So also the frequency of alcohol exposure, the intensity, like how much alcohol was the baby exposed to, all those things, whether dad was drinking during the 3 months prior to conception, presence of maternal stress hormones, is mom under chronic stress exposure? That's going to make a difference too. How well nourished or hydrated was mom? All those things play into it, and many, many more factors. And because we are complex, multidimensional creatures, so are the effects of alcohol. And as you can see from this diagram, there's no clear and concise FASD pattern. Oftentimes, diagnoses are missed because there's no hard and fast pattern of things to look for, because so many people are looking for the facial features and don't know to look for all these other things. Parents of kids impacted by FASD so often become very isolated. Their friends take off. Their even extended family will abandon them because the world assumes that all behavior stems from intention, from choice. Therefore, the assumption is you have a bad child, or you're a bad parent that doesn't know how to discipline. Well, if I was their parent, blah, 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 blah. That leaves you very isolated, very alone, very frustrated, very scared of your child's future. But take heart. It's 1 in 20 people that are affected. That means you are not the only one in your shoes. There are a lot of families in your community who are also feeling very isolated, very fearful of their kids' futures, very heartbroken, mourning the dreams, the way they hoped their child's life would be, and just hurting as well as frustrated. And yes, angry at times. But again, you're not alone. And there are ways to find your tribe, including support groups online or through Facebook. You'll find a lot of groups there too. All right. So in addition to alcohol being a solvent, it's also a neurotoxin, which means that alcohol changes the structure of the nerve cells. And our brain is nothing but nerve cells. So changing the structure of those nerve cells change the way the nerves communicate with one another, and therefore changes the way our brains function. And that can impact everything about our lives, or maybe only a couple things. Again, we are all impacted differently. Not even twins will have identical presentations. So do you remember the PSA from the 1980s? This is your brain on drugs, right? This showed an egg frying in a frying pan, very powerful stuff. Well, I'm not going to show you your brain on drugs. What I'm going to show you is your baby on booze. And yes, I'm going to use eggs too, because they represent a very infantile creature, right? Whether it's a chicken or a person. And also because the whites kind of represent the amniotic fluid that our babies are nourished within. All right, so for grins and giggles, I cracked an egg into 5 different types of glasses of 5 different types of commonly consumed alcohol, and I watched over time the changes that occurred. In each of the next 5 slides, you're going to see a series of 3 pictures. The alcohol that, when I first cracked the egg into it, the glass of alcohol at the end of my little experiment, and then lastly, I wanted a closer look at the egg and the yolk. Afterwards, I very gently poured the contents of the glass through a sieve. And I took a picture, for grins and giggles. the egg yolk at the end. So we'll take a look at this. White wine often accompanies a meal. You can see the alcohol interacting with the egg yolk kind of immediately. You can kind of follow that it was definitely moving as it began interacting. And the other thing to point out is that the yolk is different. I did not cause that. Okay, red wine. A lot of women are told, it's good for the heart. And although it may not be the best for the baby, it's better than all the chronic stress hormones. So if it's going to help mom stay calm and cool and collected, well, we're not going to stop it. Well, we know that there is no safe type of alcohol, right? This was not the best type of wine to use, though, simply because it's hard to see through. Then I use beer. You can see that the interaction between the beer and the egg white is significantly more than what we saw in the white wine. Vodka is next. With the vodka, this is kind of alarming. You see initially, and again, this is within like a second of dropping the egg into the glass, you can see there's a lot more interaction between the vodka and the egg white than there had been at this point for the other beverages. And then also this one, I can't look at this picture without thinking of egg drop soup. If you've ever made it, you drizzle egg white into the soup while it's on the stove, and the egg white instantly cooks and it kind of blows up and gets white. How can you not think of that as you look at this photo? And that's kind of alarming. And then lastly, the whiskey, again, probably not the best beverage for me to have chosen simply because it's hard to see through. It's a lot thicker. It's more opaque. It's not a clear liquid, but you can still see enough to see that there's a lot of interaction between the whiskey and the egg white in this first picture. But alarmingly, in the final picture, I'm not showing the sieve. Because as I took the glass away, I happened to glance and notice that there was a lot of egg yolk left in the bottom of the glass. And frankly, I think that's a little alarming. So the takeaway is that in 14 and a half hours, when I needed my kitchen counters back, we can see the pickling effect of alcohol on the structure of an egg. 14 hours, imagine 9 months. But again, you don't need to be a daily drinker to cause damage to your child. Binge drinking can cause lifelong damages to the way in which their brain functions, right? Because the structure has changed. So can even one drink at the right time, one drink, especially if it's an alcohol-intensive cocktail, can cause lifelong damages, lifelong harm to a child. So I can imagine at this point you're thinking, well, Patti, isn't the baby's liver formed in the first month of pregnancy? That's what I found when I Googled it. Well, yes, but there's always a but. The two enzymes that break the alcohol down, that metabolize it, those two things that are generally associated with the liver don't come online. They don't come on board until very late in the pregnancy. The first one, ADH, or alcohol dehydrogenase, that is actually first found in the brain, and it kind of moves where it lives in the body to the liver late in the 8th month. So the last 6 weeks or so of pregnancy is when ADH moves into the liver as far as where it's going to do its work for the rest of the person's life, right? The other one barely makes an appearance at all prior to delivery. So yeah, the liver's there, but the mechanism for metabolizing the alcohol is not until much later in the pregnancy. Now, if you noticed, I said ADH is first found in the brain. That means that alcohol is getting broken down and metabolized in the baby's brain. The number one toxic particle that comes from metabolized alcohol is called acetaldehyde. Well, that's wreaking havoc on the baby's brain. Now, we've all grown up believing that all behavior is the result of our choices in life. Whether we're parents or professionals, that's what we're taught. And that's what professionals learn in their schools And it's why they use motivational strategies like rewards or consequences or the infamous sticker chart or other kinds of token economies. All those things are designed to change your child's choices and change their behavior. And the belief is that if you as the parent can offer the right bribe or threaten the right punishment, that perfect negative consequence, then eventually your child's going to make the choices that the adults in his or her life want them to make. But this is their tried and true methodology, and it does work for most kids. But if your child's brain has been rewired by prenatal exposure to alcohol, these tried and true traditional approaches are not going to work long term. They can't, because you cannot use a motivational strategy to undo physical changes that occurred before the child was born. You can no more use a motivational strategy or a sticker chart or anything else to grow back a missing limb magically than you can will a child who's blind to read the blackboard simply by repeatedly telling them, you could do it if you tried harder. It's not going to work. For people whose disabilities are visible, the solution lies in finding accommodations or workarounds in the environment that are designed to enable your child or the person with a visible disability to meet their goals, right? To cross the street safely, to get around because of curb cuts, whatever, to read Braille, whatever the case is, they are environmental accommodations designed to pick up the slack for what's difficult for the person to do. All right. It's just as important for people whose disabilities happen to be invisible to have those same approaches. People with invisible disabilities deserve that same approach. It's ethical. Right? It's also important to realize that as humans, we have an internal frame of reference. The gut instinct is that other people think and do things the way we do. It's just the natural, instinctive way that we work. We have to train ourselves not to do that. And it is possible. But it catches us off guard when people do things in a way that we don't. And that leads to, oftentimes, judging things that are different as bad or wrong. But behavior is not moral. It simply points to the way that a living organism functions in the moment. We also have to think about trauma and the effect of trauma in all this and in a child's behavior. Suppose our children's experiences are such that they get blamed, shamed, and punished because of their differences. That's not fair. And it shapes them to become very easily defensive. That's normal. It's very normal. If you get attacked again and again and again and again, you can see it from a mile away. You can smell the judgment and defend against it in a heartbeat. Add to that, if your child comes to you through foster care or adoption, then they also have those other traumas of losing family, of losing home, friends, routines. Anything that was normal is gone. That is significant. And if it's foster care and your child's been bounced from home to home to home to home, that's repetitive trauma. Like it or not, fair or not, you've got to prove that you're going to be there for the long haul. All right, so you put all that together and they're going to be defensive at the drop of a hat. Now, all those reflexes, whether it's shutting down or fighting back or running away, all those things that we say are problematic and social workers will say, get that kid into therapy. All those things are natural protective reflexes. And when parents and teachers and therapists try to strip away those protective behaviors without stopping to consider what are those behaviors designed to protect our kiddo from, to guard against, then we're going to miss the mark. The therapists are going to miss the mark, and the child will be further traumatized, and their self-concept will be ground further into the dust. It's not what any of us want. Let's use a computer analogy. Our brain structure is the computer's hard drive, right? Alcohol damages that. Brain tasks, in other words, the micro steps that anyone's brain has to be able to do in order to get X, Y, or Z done, those are things like working memory, sequencing, generalizing knowledge from one setting to another, managing sensory stimulation, many, many more things. All those things make up the operating system. And then you have people's expectations for normal in whatever the setting is. Well, those are the software programs. So when the hardware is damaged by alcohol, the operating system malfunctions, and that leads to the software not being able to fulfill the commands as expected. These are the glitches that you've been experiencing numerous times each and every day in your home. But, what does that look like? And to give you an example, comedians have been making fun of kids' poor hygiene for decades. And as parents, we have decades of being able to do this. We see it as something very simple. If they're 7 or older, they ought to be able to do it on their own completely, blah, blah, blah. There's actually a minimum of 18 steps. And if you really want to break stuff down into the micro steps that make up each and every action involved in that process, there's well over 30. Things like remembering to bring clean clothes or PJs into the bathroom with you, remembering how to turn on the water, adjust the temperature, getting undressed, using the toilet beforehand, because otherwise you're going to need to use it as soon as the water hits you. And I'm not going into all those micro steps. Getting in and out of the stream of water and using product, whether it's facial soap, shampoo, conditioner, body wash. It's the in and out, in and out, in and out, judging when is something clean by how it feels in my fingertips, turning the water off, hanging things up, drying off, putting the towel away instead of leaving it on the floor, whatever your family's routines are and expectations, that's part of the equation. Now, if your child's brain has been rewired that they can't sequence things well, then they're going to have problems. If it's rewired in a way that they can't maintain focus, there are going to be problems. Surely I'm not the only one who's been so transfixed on all the things that lay ahead of me in the day, because it's a really, really busy day that, oh my gosh, I get out of the shower and realize I didn't rinse the conditioner out. Well, then it's back in to finish what I started, and my whole day is off kilter because I've made myself late for everything because of that bad start. And I know I'm not the only one. What else could go wrong with this situation? Being able to take a shower in a way that satisfies adult expectations. Maybe the brain is rewired in such a way that I have on and off days, right? It's called sporadic mastery. You see this also in the classroom, where some days I know the material and other days, did I ever hear that before? I have no clue, right? Or tying shoes. Some days, yeah, I can do it easily. And other days it's like, the heck do I do? What about working memory? If your child's brain's rewired so that it can only hold one or at most two things, and you give them a laundry list of things that they need to do when they get home from school, because they always do the same things when they get home from school, and they can do it Monday, they can do it Thursday, and there's no reason why they can't remember this, because it's practice, practice, practice. But if that day at school was particularly stressful, then their batteries are depleted. There's no gas in the tank. What if it's rewired in such a way that it takes your kiddo much longer than it takes most kiddos to process what was said to them or asked of them? We call that delayed auditory processing. That happens too quite often. You'll see those kids will say, "What?" or "I don't know." to a lot of what you say or ask. And it's their brain's defenses trying to buy more time so that they can finish processing what it was that you had said to them. So if your kiddo does that a lot, slow down and give them more time. What if the rewiring makes it impossible to connect cause and effect? Well, then your kiddo is not going to be able to rein in those impulses. They're just going to run and do whatever it is that goes through their mind. What if their brain makes it impossible to keep track of time while they're engrossed in an activity, whether it's playing a video game or reading a book or whatever the case they may be? For them, time stands still. For us living in the adult world, it rarely stands still, and we get very frustrated. Well, it's not fair to them if we have deadlines and we need them to get up and go. We need to be the bigger person and realize, okay, my child really struggles with this, so I'm going to tell them 10 minutes, like half an hour in advance, so that it can actually happen and we can actually get out the door in time. What if your child cannot read because of the way their brain's been rewired, social cues, or interpret facial language or body language, right? That will make them particularly vulnerable to the bullies in school or in the community. And the older we get, the harsher the forms of bullying become, the more dire the consequences are. If we end up, as a person living with FASD, taking the fall for someone else's misdeeds. So let's talk about accommodations or workarounds. We've got a lot to do on our end. We have a lot of shifts to make in the way that we view our kids' behavior. We need to remember it's not that they want to do things or they are choosing not to obey us. It's not that they won't do something. It's that they cannot do it without support. So we need to put those supports in place. We need to be willing to say, are my expectations unreasonable? Unrealistic expectations is the biggest cause of angry outbursts. So am I being reasonable with expecting my child to do things the way I want them to? Knowing that there are no two people that have the same combination of strengths, challenges, and preferred learning styles. Our combination of those three factors is as unique as our fingerprint. So we need to give each other space and grace. So we have to be willing to let go of our priorities. As I said earlier, if we're running late, if we have demands and deadlines, then we need to be more proactive in our planning. Accounting for the way our child's brains are programmed to operate. We need to build in that time because it's not fair to them. And, oftentimes we will have family members, neighbors, officials say they've got to be able to function in the real world. Well, we're all already in the real world. We would never dream of saying to someone who uses a wheelchair, well, that's fine to use that at home, but you've got to function out in the real world. We would never dream of doing that. By the same token, the way we are wired, it's hardwired into us. Accommodations come from outside, just like a curb cut or a traffic signal that beeps. Those are things from outside the person. So we need to realize that. We need to get in the habit of saying, what if my kiddo's brain is wired differently? What if it's wired in the way that it makes it challenging to do X, Y, or Z, and become very curious, insatiably curious about what's the point of struggle and how can we help? What tools can we put in place? And we need to let go of that righteous indignation about normalcy. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Is our child hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Fix those things and then address whatever else. Are they fighting an illness? Are they adequately nourished or hydrated? What about sleep? There's a huge difference between sleep and rest. And if we ensure that there's good sleep hygiene for ourselves, our loved ones, and our kiddos that have FASD, a lot of the behavioral stuff is going to get better because our brains work better when they have that cyclical rest. There's a big difference between sleep and rest, and I'm sure you guys have learned that as well. History of trauma plays into all this. Our daily stressors play into all this, and I could go on and on and on, but I'm sure you get the idea. So starter strategies can include things like visual schedules. I use the schedule on my phone all the time. Use fewer words with concrete language. Make sure that we are saying what we mean and meaning what we say. Don't tell your child, pick that up, and assume that they know that means and put it away. We have to say and put it away. Otherwise, they're still going to be holding it in 20 minutes because we didn't tell them to put it away. We have to be thoughtful and mindful of things like that. And is this a lot of work? Yes, it is. There's a saying that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of correction. However that goes, any effort that we put into prevention is going to pay off in spades. It's going to be so worth it to have more peace in our homes. And we have to take detailed notes of what's going on about situations and see, are there any patterns? The more detailed notes we can make about behavioral patterns, or the problem patterns, the more tailored the workarounds can be. So think of them as patches for your computer glitches. We need to offer our kids patches instead of punishment. And lastly, become your child's fiercest advocate. All the things that you learn about your child in this process, share that knowledge with the other adults in your kiddo's life, whether it's teacher, therapist, whoever. Don't hog all that knowledge and keep it hidden away, but share it. Because everyone has the good intentions. Even if it seems like they're being harsh and judgmental towards your child, towards you, they do want to help. But they also have a lot of other people that they're trying to help. And they probably have never learned any of this stuff. None of us knew what we didn't know until we finally learned it. Right now, everybody is learning that behavior comes from our choices. Therefore, the kids are choosing to be bad, choosing to be obstinate, blah, 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 and they'll use motivational strategies. This is neurological. This is neurological, so we have to have that approach and think of accommodations. So know also that in terms of this kind of parenting, you don't need to wait for your child to be diagnosed to start parenting in this manner. Parenting in this manner with insatiable curiosity and as your child's helper and supporter, all kids will thrive with this approach. Kids. So even though it is work to be preventative, it's less stressful than having crises and explosions and hurt feelings and damaged relationships. That pain goes with kids a long time and affects future generations. So we want all the kids in your home to be thriving. So think about adopting this kind of approach. If the adults in your child's life, whether it's teacher, therapist, doctor, whoever, if they've not heard this approach before, then refer them to groups like FASD United or FASD, which is the Canadian FASD organization, or the FASD Collaborative Project. That organization has a huge video library. In fact, a training very similar to this I did for the professionals will be with them very shortly if it's not already. And so you can also refer the professionals in your child's life directly to me at contact@patriciakasper.com, Kasper's with a K. My business, Kasper's FASD Life Coaching and Training, is one half coaching for either adults or parents of littles, and it's one half professional development training. That's the other half of my business. For low cost, no cost options, there's my book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with Adults Living with FASD. Like I said, it's only diagnosed 0.01% of the time. On my podcast, Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper, that's out every week. No cost. And thank you for your time, for your persistence, and for the love you have for it, all the people in your life. That's what brought you here. That's what's kept you here. I thank you for that because I know it will make a difference for your child or children. Thank you so much.